brothers and sisters, with anybody who isn't Māori, let's talk about how we managed to get through this. We did this by following those values, or trying to follow those values. And those values, we talk about them in Māori as being power words. Aroha ki te tautoko, love to all humanity. You can only have unconditional love if you have a relationship with the fellow upstairs. Because none of these things can happen if Te Ariki Mātua isn't at the forefront of whatever it is that you do as a unit. Thank you very much. You've been very, very lovely listening to me. A croaky little voice, so I'm going to move through now. And
no, you're not.
No, I'm not.
Because I'm going to ask if there are any questions, because, people might want to ask you things. And I even put some water here for you, so here you go.
Are you staying for the day, or are we going to disappear?
No, unfortunately, I have to scoot away about half an hour. I've got, as Stephanie inferred, I'm the head of the tari for Tahahi Rātana, for the Rāna Church, so I look after the whole of the South Island and the Shadow Islands. And so we've got a hui coming up about 1 o'clock. And I've got to do a Zoom with all these fellas from the Chathams and other places, so I would love to stay. Stephanie would invite me to stay, no, I would love to stay. I think it's a really important hui. I think what you're doing is really important. It's amazing to have you here. And the fact that you're going to pay me, you got here, and Christchurch, where the hell there you go. Can't too much about that, you said.
Thank you for what you've shared. How's the job going? How's it? I don't hear.
Good question.
How you go?
So I started this process 18 months ago.
Yeah.
And in that process, I ended up writing our cultural assessment, which the staff all do now. They come through and they're assessed, and there's 3 places that they're assessed in. All stemming from the values. So I'm happy to actually say that probably when I started it was difficult, but 2/3, so we've got I think just over 300 staff in our takiwā. So Nelson Marlborough through to Greymouth, through to Ashburton, and through to Christchurch. So we've got a big area to cover. And I'm happy to say that probably 2/3 of the staff are on board, they're excited, they're happy. It makes my life just so much better, because 20 years ago this would never have happened. It would not have happened where I would be free to be able to express these values. I literally, there are days when I sort of walk around getting quite weepy, because it's been a hard, long slog. 180 years of watching, not me personally, obviously. I'm looking very good for my age, but watching, in fact, my grandparents and not just my grandparents either, but the grandparents of my cousins, and working, every hour God gave them, and then giving their money to fight the treaty, and often having no money to look after their family. Eating. I remember my father telling me stories about when they were really, really hard up, my grandparents still giving what they had, and my dad and his 11 siblings having a big pot of eel bone soup, which was basically bones of an eel. I don't know if you've ever seen bones of an eel, not much, and some water. And that was my father's kai. That's what he lived on. Him and his family. So I've seen and heard things that I guess you, if you're going to let it destroy you, it could. Colonisation happened. It was going to happen anyway. If it wasn't the British, it was going to be the Germans. If it wasn't the Germans, it was going to be the French. Colonisation happened. It happened. Okay. So what didn't happen very nicely? And that, I guess, is the crux of the problem, is that it didn't happen nicely. Not many colonisers are nice when they colonise countries, so we just look at the Incas and the Spanish, good God. So, colonisation will happen. I guess my point for the team that I work with is, there were atrocities on both sides. Yes, there were. And some of it still makes me a bit dark. However, we're here to do it through our tikanga. We're here to do it through our whakawhanaungatanga, we're here to do it through our aroha ki te takata. We're here to do it to weave together our own specialness, because Kiwis are really special, if you hadn't noticed. We're very, very special people. We're way different from our brothers over the ditch. Seriously. Got better accents too, by the way. Though we are very, very special people, we are God's chosen people. Māori grew up believing we were the 13th tribe of Israel, so, you know, we're very, very special, not just because we have Māori, not just because we have non-Māori, but because we have a living, breathing culture that we can weave together and own as our own. That's where I'm trying to head, and hopefully, yeah, the conversations that you go on and have about the treaty, just remember, we had to colonise. And there are still some very angry Māori, there's still some very angry non-Māori about it. At the end of the day, it happened. How do we just take that last step and come together and acknowledge that and love each other just because we can? And we stop saying things like, oh, I've got Maori friends, oh, I've got Pākehā friends. When that day stops, when people acknowledge each other as friends, just friends, because they're not brown, they're not white, they're not pink, they're not blue, they're just friends. And when we get to that day, we have gained and gotten to kōteitanga, because we no longer judge people or include them because of their skin colour or their beliefs. So, very good question. And hopefully, yeah, if I see you again maybe in 3 years, 3 or 4 years, we'll have moved on. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay, Jane's going to say all of that. So just stand.
I keep trying to stage, sorry.
On behalf of us all, bless you and thank you so, so much. And as you mentioned, it's love God, love each other. And, you know, that's it. And thank you for the three strands weaving together. And thank you for presenting it in a loving way. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, it won't be today.
Reverend David Jackson, our next speaker. He's been at Scots College, this is his 12th year. He was appointed initially in 2009 as assistant chaplain and RE teacher, and in 2017 was appointed chaplain. Grew up in the South Island, born in Dunedin, a place close to my heart, and went to Wellington for university. He's been there since, with now his wife Linda and 3 children. And he said to me he is very grateful to the board of Scots College for allowing him to have scholarship last year, time to study Māori expressions of Christianity, which I believe is what you're going to come and speak to us now. David, come on up.
I te tuatahi whakakaroria ki te atua te ariki te rangi me tēnei whenua hoki. Kia te taha o toko whaia, me mihi ana au ki ngā tohu o ni o Mirihiku, te whenua o ka tamarikitanga. Ko taki tēnu, te maunga, rūnei, taku, ngākau, ko oriti te awa e amahia nei aku māharahara. Kia te taha o toko mātua, ko tauwhare te maunga, kaipara te awa, ko ngā te whātua te iwi, te tau te hapu, ko rewati te whenua, piti te rā, te marae. Ko te whanganui atara, toko kāinga i whānau mai aku tamariki ki kora. Ko David toko ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa. So that's a little bit about me and where I'm from. If you can't quite make out the pictures, down the bottom of the South Island is where I grew up, near Takatimu Mountains. And believe it or not, that tin shed up in the top left there, that's my family marae up near Auckland. And I visited that for the first time this year. But that's a bit about me. Let me tell you about this character, Hemi Pōtakai. Ngāti Whātua, sorry, it's me, not him. Ngāti Kahungunu Te Iwi, Rākai Pākata Hapu, Tāne Nui Arangi Te Marae. Pōtato was born in 1905 and he lived a life of firsts. He was the first student of Māori descent to attend Scots College. He started there in 1920, 5 years after the college was established, and he attended with the help of this woman, Sister Edith Walker. She helped pay his fees to go there. While he was a student, he played in the first 15 and it seems like he did a lot of things as well as study, but he gifted the first 15 and eventually the college haka. And we've just had that kind of repolished and revamped this year in honour of his time. He went on from Scots College to attend Knox Theological College. He was the first Māori to graduate from that college and be ordained as a Presbyterian minister. And he eventually became a moderator of what is now Te Apo. And the man who's just appeared down there next to him, and the next to Sister Edith Walker, is Hone Lawton, one of a Scotsman, one of his mentors. And I'll hopefully remember to mention him later. As well as being a church leader, he was instrumental in the establishment of Māori language departments in broadcasting. He was a big driver behind Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. And so, inspired by this amazing servant of God, I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship from the school last year to explore how does his life and his faith, what can that teach us? How can I, as a chaplain, look at his life and think about the bicultural New Zealand that my students are graduating into? And it turns out that there's no real simple answer to this question, so I've just written down some stories that I wanted to share with you. And I'll give you a couple of maps. If I've zoomed in too far, the map on the left is Northland. Off the bottom of the map is Auckland City. Just above that you'll see Rewa Te Marae, which I mentioned before, in Makarang Harbour. All the way up the top there, the little black mark is Marsden Cross and the Waitangi Treaty Grounds. And then the map on the right is the second one. That's Bay of Plenty at the top and East Cape on the right hand side. And so I travelled down from Ohopi down through to Urewera and out to Nuhaka. But first, the first thing I want to tell you this is that I think Marsden Cross, Oihi and the Waitangi Treaty Grounds are places that every New Zealander should visit. But a highlight for me personally was that I got to take my dad away with me on this trip because I had never visited, I'd never been north of Browns Bay in Auckland, and so I'd never visited our marae. But I'd used these words, rewati and mahurangi and pepiha, when I'd spoken in places, and they became real life places to me. And I saw my family name in urupa, on headstones and things like that. And this history that I'd kind of grown up with as a kid my whole life became something really real for me when I started seeing these things in real life. Now, before I tell you my story, I want to just look at this word biculturalism. I think it's a word that trips us up sometimes. We can think of New Zealand as multicultural, and that's true. We have, Kai Tahura Te Aotearoa, Chinese, English, Samoan, all these different cultures in our country. But all of us will fit into these two groups, either tangata whenua, that's people of the land, or tangata treaty, people of the treaty. And of course, that overlaps as well. There are people who will fit into both. What I mean by tangata whenua, the best way I've explained that in English is you get your New Zealanderness from time immemorial. You've always been here. And you can stand literally on the land for your identity. Tangata treaty, you have a legal document that you can stand on and say, I am a New Zealander because of this document. And both of those are valid and important ways to be New Zealanders. And so I've stopped using words like Pākehā or other words and started using words like tangata treaty as a way of saying my New Zealanderness as a Pākehā or whatever is really valid. It's just as valid as tangata whenua. I'm just as much a New Zealander because of that. Okay, story number one. You've probably heard of what happened on Christmas Day in 1814. And the Reverend Samuel Marsden preached at Rangihawa Bay. This is it here, looking down on it. You can see this wee kind of hilly knob there with the cuts on it. That was the Pā site. And down at the bottom there's the bay where he preached. And I've highlighted the little white box is where Marsden Cross is. And that's how big Marsden Cross is compared to my dad. So we presumably know this story because we've sung the song Te Hara Nui, which tells about the first time the gospel was preached in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's a really familiar song. I didn't know this, it was written in the 50s, so it's been around for a while. But it misses quite a few details. For example, what led up to this point? What was it that brought Marsden over anyway? Did he just rock up and preach? And then what happened afterwards? Did he hang around? Was he run out of town? What happened? The quiet bay of which the song speaks, known as Waihi or Hohi or Rangihawa, had a pā in it. And the local rangatira there, his name was Ruatara. He had travelled to Sydney, and that is where he met Marsden and befriended him. And it's because of this relationship that Marsden was invited to come to New Zealand and to preach. Rangihawa Bay is now a historical park, and as you enter, you go between these two pau. And on the left it has the name Marsden carved, and on the right it has the name Ruatara. There's two people responsible for the Gospel's introduction to New Zealand. In fact, Ruatara is known as Ruatara te ara o te rongopai. That means Ruatara, the pathway for the Gospel. Now on that day we know that Marsden preached on Luke chapter 2. It was Christmas Day after all. I bring you tidings of great joy. And he set up a mission there. But he didn't stick around. And then the accounts of the foreign missionaries who were there, they're pretty unimpressive. But somehow the good news of great joy managed to travel right across this country. And it wasn't by foreign missionaries. It was by Māori evangelists, and it was shared in Te Reo Māori. Two Bible stories I think about when I think of this story. The first of which is the Tower of Babel. And I was raised kind of with the understanding that the Tower of Babel is a story of God getting grumpy at people for breaking the rules, and it's a bit of a punishment. But in recent times I've been thinking of it more as a story of creation. Right from Genesis 1, in Genesis 1, God is separating things and putting diversity into the world. Genesis chapter 2, he creates a man and woman, a gender diversity. And in chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, they think, let's reach God in our monolingual, monocultural monolith. And God said, that's not how the world's meant to be. And so it creates this diverse linguistic and cultural world. So I'm actually, and I'll tell you about also, of course, the story of Pentecost, another Bible story that deals particularly with language. The events of Acts chapter 2, often thought of as the birthday of the church. The very first event in church history, you could say, was for God's Spirit to be poured out on people so that those from all over the world could understand what the disciples are saying. And I think that's important for us to remember, because God could just have easily made it so that the people visiting could understand the local language. I mean, if God's going to change people's understanding of languages, he could have just made everyone monocultural. But instead, God's Spirit's poured out to make things much more diverse. The church has been diverse from its beginning. Now, let's get back to these shores here. This is Reverend Kingi Ehaka, and he likens the Gospel's translation not to language or to the events of Acts chapter 2, but instead he likens it to a poi which flies around the country. And he's written a song called He Poi, and it names the places that the gospel travelled to and the people who took it there. And hopefully, I didn't check this before we started, I've got a 45-second clip I can play. Will it start playing some songs? The volume's up? Let's give it a try. It's embedded in the PowerPoint. I'd like to learn how to sing this song, but I'm not going to learn it here. Let me try. No, it's not one of my songs.
Can you go back?
Oh, here we go. Shall we go into it?
Oh. Hitiro e mai wite ka puta puringa he tauma pene na ngā tupuna he poi, hei. Koi puritia, koi takawiri tau watu, ko te tau. Patu, taku poi, kāre re taku poi, ere tika atua na kātau ki ngāpu, keira te toka, keira ni hoa, kei o i ira, ko te toka tēnā, i poua e te rongo paira e.
Did we hear the words rangi haua come through? Oihi? That's only the first part of the song. It goes on to mention all the way down to Wanganui and across to the east coast of the North Island. But he doesn't mention the South Island, so I thought maybe I'd share with you how the gospel came to the South Island. It's an important story for me because I live in Porirua, where this guy, Te Rauparaha, who knows Te Rauparaha? Fantastic. He, Ngāti Toa is the mana whenua where I live. Te Rauparaha is the famous rangatira there. He's famous for that, and he's famous for writing the haka kamate, which the All Blacks perform. Except they no longer perform it in the South Island, because the other thing he's famous for is coming down to Kaiapoi and beating the snot out of people. And so, I think it's a good thing they don't perform this haka down here. But there's another Te Rauparaha, Tamihana Te Rauparaha, that's his son. And he actually was with his father when he invaded. And Tamihana came down later on as an adult. He converted to Christianity, and if you know the story of Te Rori in her book, he was converted as part of that story. He came down to here, and he was asked by the locals, it's a bit worrying you being here, what's going to happen? And this is a quote that he said, translated of course. He said, I've indeed come hither to you to bring an end to warfare and to bind firmly peace by virtue of the words of the gospel of the Lord. This, I think, as we think about how we need to include New Zealand history in our curriculums going forward, we're in a really interesting place. There are stories of redemption and reconciliation, of biculturalism that are really important to our history, and I think as church schools we've got a really amazing opportunity to share these local histories with people. A couple of other important stories for me, because I think that these stories of redemption and of the gospel are our stories too, as church schools. And what I mean by church, by our stories, is best summed up in a story from Year 7 EOTC. As part of our EOTC program, I took our Year 7s to this marae. This is Te Kākano Te Aroha Marae in Lower Hutt. It's our local Presbyterian church marae. Sadly, it's the world's most southern Presbyterian marae. But it was amazing to go there. And after we'd had our pōwhiri and were welcomed in, and they explained a bit of the carvings around the place, and they pointed out Roa Kenana, who was on one of the carvings, and they also pointed out Hone Lawton, John Lawton, who I mentioned at the beginning. I just politely interrupted our host and said, look, can I just add something to that about the carving of Hone Lawton? Because one of his students, Hemi Portato, was a student of ours at Scots, and in fact one of our junior school houses is named Portato House after him. And so with these year 7s, I stopped them and said, look, who was in Portato House last year? And a number of them put their hands up, and I made the connection, Portato, Lawton, this type of thing. And straight away, the eyes picked up, and they knew that this story, this carving on this wall, was their story as well. They'd drawn that line. It was like, for me, although I don't have carvings and a wharenui to look at, I have names on headstones and things that connect me to Urupa and Marae. It was that moment for them. It made the stories come so much more alive. And when the line had been drawn from them to Portato to Lawton, then of course right at the figurehead there to Christ and to God, the story all kind of connected together for them. So my journey, originally I had intended to understand my Māori whakapapa better and how perhaps utilising that could help me with students in a bicultural situation. But actually it led me to understand myself and value my Pākehā identity much stronger. And I think that's for us as schools who want to connect, there's a parallel there. We want to connect with mana whenua, with our Māori in really genuine ways. But there's no point in pretending that we come to these relationships with a blank slate. We have a history and a story, and we want to connect and weave together, as Kim was saying, with other people with histories and stories. But what we might also discover, as I've discovered, that there's been a lot of weaving happening before we even decided to start joining in the conversation. Here's just another little thought, perhaps, for us in our schools. As students will see pictures like this, and they will point out that that's not what Jesus actually looked like. And I've used those comments as a really good teaching opportunity to say, hey, but, you know, it's a very good cultural interpretation, probably for a culture on the other side of the world, to understand that Jesus is one with us. But do our students associate this depiction of Jesus as equally culturally influenced and equally valuable and important in our world, in our country? Or when we say church, do they think of churches like that? When we could equally mean churches like this one. This, some of you will recognise as the Church Marae at Hopi, which I think for us is probably as relevant a symbol of our church as the one below could be. In fact, I'm not even sure it's a Presbyterian church, but okay, last story from me, and it's about the church at Hopi and a short visit I had there. You'll know that at the top, the figure of the church is Jesus Christ, but along the sides, on the insides of the church, are carvings, and each of them is from a different part of the country, and they all tell a different biblical story, or rather they all tell a story which tells the same story as a biblical story. So, for example, the one that stood out to me was Paikia and Piripua, who rescued people from a flood by climbing a mountain. And there's parallels there, of course, with Noah and the ark. But the one that really captured my attention was right down the very back. It's kind of the last one in the building. And that bird to the side of the figure is actually above the figure in the real carving. And I looked at it and I kind of went, oh yeah, bird like a dove, but the Holy Spirit is above someone's head. Oh, sometimes when there's the Spirit has a flame above people's heads, and this is kind of at the end of the whare. Maybe this is the story of Pentecost, of the Spirit coming and sending the disciples out, or guiding them and empowering them as they go. And I asked, am I correct in guessing that, because I wanted some kind of like brownie points, but they said to me, oh, that's really interesting, because the bird there is a mātangi, and they're the birds that helped the waka navigate their way to Aotearoa. So I'm still not sure whether this is meant to depict Pentecost or not, but a story really close to my heart that I know as an RE teacher, as a chaplain, as a Christian, I could see and look at that. And stories, of course, that they knew, they brought to the table and pulled together. So, I feel I've just left a mess of stories and ideas and things that I find interesting just on your laps. And I'm happy to leave it that way, because I think what I've done is proven that I'm not an expert in this. I'm just an excited student who wants to share some things that I've learned. And hopefully, as we all hope, you can become excited students too in this type of area. So those of you who are excited, these are two books that I think every one of our schools should have. Really cool things. Awesome. That was a funny voice.
That was funny.
Do people want to ask questions, or can I sit down and stop being nervous? Yeah, Jill.
Do you still sing Te Haranui? Sing Te Haranui?
I mean, I only think about that at Christmas time. I was in preparing different words, because I think it's still a really important story, but just like reading the first page and not actually knowing what's going on.
I didn't sing it last year. I just got to the point, actually, no, I can't. But then I did in church when I actually told the backstory.
Yeah.
And it's like it needs to have the context.
Oh.
But I know that Sue Nepham in Dunedin has just rewritten some words to the tune. So that's something to look out for.
I'll look into that. Yeah, that'd be cool. Yes.
On that, we had actually Paul had an interesting experience about 3 years ago here in this chapel when we were doing a Christmas Eve service, or we taking the service, and an old Legion came back to school, and he must have left school maybe 11 years ago, and he got in touch with Paul afterwards and was quite aggressive in his criticism of us singing that song, and it was really interesting how in his life beyond St Andrews and where we were at the time that he was here, he didn't appreciate how far we've come, but we also had really articulated in our own minds perhaps the inappropriateness of that. And marriage was always a beautiful way of singing, isn't it? So we did make peace with him, or Paul did, after that, and explained how far we had come in time. But it's interesting to hear it brought up again.
Yeah. And it's kind of like Kim was saying, like colonisation did happen and it sucks. But, from my point of view, I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for that. But we also wouldn't be bicultural if it wasn't for that as well. So the world is what it is, right? And we just kind of have to make the best of that and kind of heal it. The other thing that kind of just came to mind as you guys were talking was that, and no disrespect to you, Jordan, I think it's wonderful to travel to the other side of the world and find connections that way. But I think too, we've got so many stories of the gospel and of Christ working in this country that we should point to. One thing that I shared with Stephanie was it drives me crazy that every year at Easter time, we always have to say, oh, Easter's now because on the other side of the world it's springtime and that's when life is, all this type of stuff. But then you look out the window and the trees are dead and dying and it's absolutely Good Friday out there. And then you turn around and look at the feijoa tree and it's so full and abundant and there's too many feijoas for one person to eat, right? So why are we not using the feijoa as our Easter symbol and that abundance even when things are dying? So this year, in fact, our receptionist said, do you have a little cross? And she put a little cross on the receptionist people come into the school. And I thought, oh, well, I might give you some other symbols at different times of the year. And at Easter time, I gave her some feijoas to put at the foot of our little cross. And she then ended up writing a little note to explain to people why they were sitting there. So, I think that's it too. We can be, I think our people who've gone before us really into this whole Scottish thing and what God did over there. We should probably get just as excited about what God's been doing here. Cool. Thank you.
David, on behalf of us all, I just want to say thank you so much for that excellent talk. You've shared with us in such a personal way, such an engaging way, and you've really enthused us, made us really want to go back to our schools to use lots of all your ideas and imagination and thoughts, and certainly the feijoa. There'll certainly be feijoas instead of eggs at our place next year. So thank you so much, and just accept this on behalf of us.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here, isn't it? Couldn't gather last year, and I think we are blessed as a nation to be able to do this, that most of the world can't do that. And I'm also blessed today to introduce my neighbour from Wellington, and one of my principal colleagues, Jeanette Duffy from St Laurens, where Jeanette's been for the last 4.5 years. And as I reflected the introduction and I thought about being principal for the last 4.5 years, I thought, well, the last 2 of those have been driven by a pandemic, and I started reflecting around the importance of community and well-being as we've been part of that. And I know that some of the work that Jeanette's been doing was looking at a special character review and what that looks like and how that supported well-being through those times as well. But we know that the most important thing is people, and we know that over that time it's been really important that we've looked after our communities and our people. And I know from our neighbour and living in close proximity in Wellington, what a wonderful job Jeanette and her team have done at St Laurens. It's a magnificent school, and that community has really thrived. And I think that's also symbolic potentially of what all of us have done through this period of time and challenge. And I just really commend to you the work that the chaplains have done, the work that our boards have done, and the work that our principals have done. And I'm delighted to hear from an outstanding colleague who has done an exemplary job at his school during that time. So, Jeanette, I'd invite everyone to welcome you to the stage.
Because I feel it's like that, talk it up and hopefully someone can deliver. That's always it's here. Thank you, Brian, for those kind words this morning. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Jeanette Duffy ingoa, ko Ate Tumuaki, ko Te Kura o Hata Orana. And yes, I've had the pleasure of being principal at St Laurens for the last 4 years, just finished 4 years at the end of term 2, and looking forward to a few more. But it has been a challenging couple of years, certainly to step into principalship and nod to Helen as well, who kind of joined me at a similar time frame. So it's been interesting times, that's for sure.
I've entitled the presentation today, Sometimes the Truth is Hard to Hear, and sometimes that word review is also slightly hard to hear, particularly when you get an email from Eero, where it's a slightly different model now, and you sort of go into panic mode and think, oh, they're coming to check up on us. Last year we committed to carrying out a special character review, and we were delighted to have Reverend Stephanie Wells and Reverend Hamish Galloway come as a team to carry out that special character review. I guess we were in two minds. Last year was challenging enough, perhaps without subjecting ourselves to a special character review. We had hoped to do it in 2019, but had missed the boat on that. Joss had had a particularly challenging term one with a relationship with our student head of special character, but again I commend Joss for saying, no, let's just get on with it. Yes, it's been a tough year, but let's actually open our doors and let's do this review and let's see what we can learn. But as we know, in doing that, sometimes we also have to be open to some hard truths that may challenge us and may force us to think a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it as well. It would have been very easy to have deferred it, but we pushed on and welcomed Stephanie and Hamish into our school for three very full days. Absolutely. Right, now. Perfect. I hope we've got the right one. I've messed around with the IT people. I've been one of those nightmare presenters. Thank you so much. As many of us know, whether you engage in an external review or an internal review, the key things are about how well are we doing things at the moment, how well are we living out being a Presbyterian character school, and where is that evident within our school on a day-to-day basis. We really wanted to hear from all of our stakeholders what we were doing well and what things we needed to do better. And so we really took time to think about who were the key people we wanted Hamish and Stephanie to speak with and survey during their time with us as well. And we really wanted this to be quite future-focused. So here we were in the position, we were quite comfortable with some of the things that we had been doing, some of the ways that we had been working, but actually what else could we be doing in the future in the special character space? My background is in Catholic schools. I've spent probably 30 of my years teaching and leading in Catholic schools, where a lot of the special character is ordained, and you just do what you're told pretty much. And coming into a Presbyterian school, where perhaps there is not quite that close church school directive, I suppose, it's very easy perhaps to sit there and maybe not do too much as well, or give too much credence to special character. But for me it was important for us to define that and really think about how we're living that out on a daily basis. And then it was about the roles and responsibilities within the leadership of the school as well. I really believe that it's not my job as a principal, and nor is it Jocelyn's job as chaplain, to carry the special character single-handedly. It is about how each and every one of our staff members and our students and our wider whānau live out that special character as well in their engagement within the school. So we welcomed Hamish and Stephanie in. We said, what are we doing well? What things do you notice that are not perhaps hitting the mark? Is all our community committed to and feel that they have a responsibility for our special character, not just to uphold it, but to nurture it and grow it for the future? And what areas might we look at for enhancement, and how might we achieve this? And we were very comprehensive in our review, as you can see by the long list of people who were spoken with, interviewed, time spent with over 3 very full, very busy days. It was really important that we heard from our students, and we created a lot of focus groups across year levels. Our students were members of our Special Character Council and also on our student-led worship group. Whānau were invited in as well, and there's various different spectrums that they bring to the table. Certainly our Christian Studies teachers, but certainly our pastoral team we see as being very integral to upholding and nurturing the special character of our school. So they were also spoken with. Our board of proprietors were very much engaged and involved in the process of the review. Myself and the rest of our senior leadership team and Jocelyn, the opportunity to go into a number of our Christian Studies classes right from year 7 to 13 and to meet and talk with those girls within those classes as well. They had the opportunity to observe a chaplain's assembly, but I think we were at a level can't remember what level we were at, lost track of it, didn't we, throughout the year. So it was slightly modified. I did have the opportunity to come along to a very small chaplain's assembly and also to attend the various council meetings as well. So we cast the net really widely, and we wanted to hear, and we opened ourselves up, I guess, to the truths that may have been a little bit unpalatable, that sometimes we don't always want to hear from our stakeholders. Out of the review, there were a series of commendations and also recommendations, which we've really valued. And when Hamish was leaving on the last day, he said, I think we've just left you with a whole lot of work to do, Juliet. And I said, that's great, because actually it's endorsed a lot of my thinking around where we maybe could be going and should be going, but also it's provided us with a really clear pathway, some things that we can attend to. And some of these things were quite foundational in terms of where we went as well. The things that they said, we were doing well, they really acknowledged the fact that Centrallands was prioritising special character and that we committed a whole lot of time in terms of whole staff professional learning to that. So again, that sense that we are in this journey together, we all have a responsibility. You may be a maths teacher, but actually you have a responsibility as well to nurture the special character in our school. We were commended for our leadership focusing on a real and authentic approach to the enhancement of special character and the systems and structures that we had in place at that time to support it, but also our ongoing commitment to review and refresh and to reconnect with our special character. There were, I think, about 8 recommendations, which could have been a bit overwhelming, but as we've broken them down, worked away at them, they've really provided that navigational tool for us. A key one that I would like to share with you was around developing a philosophy of pedagogy for the teaching of Christian studies. And this has become a real foundational point for us in terms of appointing staff teaching in the Christian studies space, but also what we want the look and feel of our Christian studies lessons to look like. So this was the philosophy that we developed. I'll just give you a few seconds to have a read. This philosophy of pedagogy, which was developed within our special character subcommittee of our board of proprietors and then contributed to by our senior leaders as well, has created a real foundation stone for us in terms of curriculum development, as a professional development tool, when we are employing new staff who will be teaching not just in the Christian studies space, but across the school as well. Really important for us that people coming into Centrallands understand that this is the pedagogical approach that we are taking to Christian studies. A very loud voice, particularly from our students and from some of our staff, when we carried out the review, was they felt our Christian studies programs were too dogmatic. They were too narrow. They were exclusive rather than inclusive. And that might have been quite hard for some of us to hear, but we needed to hear it. And we needed a new signpost and direction. And this philosophy of pedagogy has really provided that for us. And the development work that we've been doing in our senior Christian studies space, in that totally new program, all the time we're coming back and saying, are we delivering on what we have set ourselves out to do and achieve? And is this program actually providing for that? I'm teaching senior Christian studies myself this year, and I was interested at the end of term 1 at a little bit of student voice. And one of my students, I said, how's it going? And what feedback would you like to give around senior Christian studies this year? This is my year 13. And she said, I'm enjoying it a lot more, but you still haven't changed my mind. And I said, I'm not actually here to change your mind, but I'm glad that you're thinking about it. And that was really what we wanted to hear, that actually through invitation, our students felt they were in a position to think and question and challenge and come to an understanding of where they are in their faith and on their faith journey. rather than being told what we would like them to think, we believe as well. So I think we're on the right path at the moment. It has been a key thing for us. The other things that, again, if we're going to carry out a review, we want to put the power of that word into action. There's no point in putting that document in your top drawer and then 5 years later thinking, oh, better check back on that and see how we're going. That philosophy of pedagogy has been key. What term did we do the review, Stephanie? Was it term 3? Wasn't it? Yes, term 3, that's right. And I said to the Board of Proprietors, I really would like this philosophy of pedagogy in place by the end of 2020, so that we have that to frame our work for this year, which we've worked really hard to achieve. What we've also continued to do is review our Year 7 and 8 Christian Studies program. We have made some changes there in that curriculum space a couple of years ago. We're calling our program Connect. And it's a combination of Christian Studies, faith in action and service, and health. And so our Year 7 and 8s have the equivalent of 3 spells a week in Christian Studies, in Connect. There's a lovely synergy that works between these curriculum areas. We have a new staff member who joined us this year, who is leading the work and the development in that place, and it continues to be reviewed and enhanced. The Senior Christian Studies program has been fully reviewed and rewritten and developed. I think we did a bit more work on that yesterday, Joss, before we jumped on the plane as well, to upload for our classes today on Google Classroom. And as I've said, the anecdotal evidence is that our students are a lot more engaged, and beginning to see that Senior Christian Studies, there's an invitational space here. We are, however, having to work through students' previous experience of Christian Studies at senior school. And that is a challenge for us, I think, as we begin to change culture and shift our feeling around the space. That will take a little while. And we're very mindful of that as we work in that Christian Studies space. We've had some staffing changes as a consequence of this review. One staff member decided to resign at the end of the year. They felt that, in fact, they were unable to embrace that philosophy of pedagogy. And we had long conversations about that. But for her, she was not comfortable in that space and chose to resign. That's quite a dramatic outcome from a review, a brave and courageous approach on her behalf, but one which allows us to honour the pedagogy that we have established for our school moving forward. As I said myself, I've been teaching in that Senior Christian Studies, that space. I believe you walk the talk when you're actually moving and doing curriculum development and design. And so being in that space and seeing how those classes are going is really important. Our DP curriculum also teaches in that Senior Christian space this year, as well as just our chaplain. And we also were invited by the review team to revisit our policy and operating guidelines for our Queer Straight Alliance in our school. Again, this had created quite a lot of consternation early in the year amongst the students, and we really wanted to send a much more inclusive message through that policy and operating guidelines. And it was a very strong recommendation coming through from the review, which we've also attended to and made that change for this year. Some things that we are still to do, still to consider how worship is presented at St Laurence. We unfortunately don't have a wonderful building like this. We have a school hall, which allows us to get 500 girls into that school, and we have our lovely proscenium arch stage. That's our chapel, although we have a little mini chapel, but we can get about 20 girls in there. So we don't have that space, but it is, even without the space, it's thinking about what do we want worship to look like at St Laurence, and that's some work for us still to be doing. And we're looking to grow a wider pool of teachers who are able to teach and willing to teach in the Christian Studies classes. And I think, again, that's helping to send a more inclusive message around faith in our schools. It isn't just the chaplain who teaches in the Christian Studies space. It might be the principal, it might be the deputy principal, it might be a biology teacher, actually. So how can we broaden that net so that it is seen as a more inclusive space by broadening our staff? And the Blue Sky thinking, of course, would be to have a wonderful space such as this, to be able to come together and worship together. Currently, our staff professional learning is heavily focused on bicultural confidence and competence, and we're ensuring again that we provide really clear alignment between our provision at St Laurence in that bicultural space and our special character. And our professional learning on Monday afternoon is very much around that, revisiting a number of Te Māori concepts actually that were shared with us this morning, and where does that align with our Presbyterian principles and values, so that our staff and our students see that alignment. There's a lot of synergy between the two, which is really advantageous and can be harnessed particularly well going forward as we do that work in that bicultural area. The word review obviously can carry negative connotations, something being done to you as a school, that your reviewers are looking for things that you aren't compliant with or are looking to catch you out. We carry out quite a lot of internal faculty review, and last term we reviewed our visual arts faculty, and when we were feeding back to them, they said to us, you shouldn't call it a review. It makes everybody really nervous and they're feeling really anxious about it. And I said, well, what would you suggest we rebrand it? And they said, we think we should call it a faculty focus. And the value they saw at the end of the review was actually it provided a focus for us as the reviewers going into their classrooms and speaking with them and their faculty. But they saw the positive process and said actually it gives them as a faculty a clear focus and direction as a team. And they particularly valued that as a faculty. So maybe we should be thinking about special character focus going forward. I think if you enter into that review as equal partners, which I think certainly we tried to do with Stephanie and with Hamish, Joss and I met with them at the beginning of the process and said this is what we would like to get out of it, this is what's going on for us as a school, and this is what we really appreciate the feedback on. Then it can absolutely work to enhance and nurture our special character of our schools and certainly help to provide useful outcomes in terms of us on our special character journey. There's a lot of power in the word around the review process, and if we're brave enough as schools and brave enough as leaders and chaplains and proprietors, then I think we can hear that truth and look to act on it. That's what I And if you have any tata or questions, I was like, happy to.
When it was written specifically with focus on the Christian studies and chaplain special character things, or was it written like in consulting on like the whole college?
In the first instance, very much around the Christian studies space, absolutely, and the staff who may be teaching that space. But I actually see it as much more generic than that. Yeah, that actually, if you are entering into teaching and working in a special character school, then this is what we ask you to embrace.
You've got to define special character for the staff.
Yeah. And we ask that when we're employing the staff, and we ask that question, are you willing to embrace the special character of the school? And every candidate normally says yes. But what is it? You're not going to say no. But what is it that we're actually asking them to embrace? And certainly when we interviewed for our new Christian Studies teacher for the start of this year, I provided the candidates with that pedagogy and actually provided them a copy of the review and said, this is where we've come from, this is where we're going, are you on that journey?
Unless the Lord builds the house, the build...
This is not for you, then probably the job isn't for you either.
Would you think of broadening that to staff who are employed in other areas?
Absolutely.
Can I just ask another question?
Yes.
Special character from a Presbyterian perspective, because I think actually we talk about special character and every school got its own special character.
Yes.
How have you inculcated that, if indeed there is such a broad church?
That's right.
Unless the Lord builds the house...
Has that been reflected in where you...
Yes, that's right. I probably should have included that in the presentation. So the work that I did when I arrived at St Laurence 4 years ago, because it was that sense of, well, what is this, And when I spoke with staff, and so I interviewed each staff when I arrived, and I said, so what do you understand by special character? What do you actually... And I spoke to 40 odd staff. And the key thing that was coming through was we're a big family. We support one another, we help one another out, and things are tough. And I thought, well, that's great. I'm not quite sure that's the essence of our special character. And so we did a lot of professional learning at that point with Sharon. Actually, Sharon came in and worked with us quite a bit. And we developed what we consider to be our 3 Presbyterian values in our community: education, as in holistic education, and unity, got to go the right way, and equality. That's actually got to go through. And we've actually developed graphics around that, images around that. And so our students now, when we talk about what are the Presbyterian values that are important to us here at St Lawrence, there's an understanding around that. And obviously language around the pit sits under that as well. But based on, absolutely, on the Bible, okay, in terms of Christian faith is the foundation stone. Yeah. Yes.
I'm interested in your philosophy statement, the word or the phrase Christian worldview.
Yes.
And so historically many of our schools were established to counter the secularization of New Zealand curriculum in state schools.
Yes.
And there would have been a binary understanding of Christian worldview. And now I think Christian worldview is quite kaleidoscopic.
Yes.
In terms of what different Christians might believe in terms of how they see the world.
Correct.
And so can you have you done a little work around that or experiences around that?
Yes, we have. And I think as we've moved into, for example, establishing our Free Straight Alliance, this year we acknowledge Pride Week at St Lawrence this year. Needless to say, you do get a number of emails and letters and phone calls saying, hang on, you're a Christian school, we're standing on this place. Absolutely. I think if we come back to that pedagogy, if we talk about, in fact, we're an inclusive school, and this is where we stand, and God, is a God of forgiveness. And I like the last line of our pedagogical statement. Our objective is for all members of the St Lawrence community to experience God's love, grace, compassion and forgiveness. That is key for us. Yes, we will have different viewpoints about where we stand on these matters, according to where we position ourselves as a Christian. This is what we stand for, and this is what we will deliver. Yeah. But it hasn't always been an easy path, nor does it continue to be.
I think we need to stand and stretch because I'm conscious Hamish has only just walked in and is the next speaker. So 5-10 minutes of just 5 minutes of walking around and then come back and then we'll have a bit of spare time, which is fantastic. Thank you for the clicker. I don't mind with that. Good so far? It's all right, I'll make the feet. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Well, I was thinking today, I know I had to go down. And I looked to see if there was another speaker, and there was, so I was like, oh my.
Nevo's good for wireless externally. So right now we've just got this plugged in to it, and then that's getting it audio. The sound on the Nevo is fantastic. Okay. It's just for a big room like this.
No, yeah. I would use it in my worship auditorium in my church. Seats about 300, half the size of this probably.
Yeah, that'll be fine. We won't need.
You don't think so?
Because
it'll pick up the loudspeaker.
Yeah.
Pick up,
Cool.
And then this is all done through an app, right?
Yeah.
Like you can choose your frame.
There are 3 apps. So you can have there's a single cam app, which is what this one runs on, because it's not the new model.
Yeah.
The new model is going to be the multicam app.
Okay.
This one will work on the multicam app, it's not designed for it.
Yes.
So the multicam app with the camera that actually
It's coming. Yeah.
Yes, Hamish, all good. It's all good. It's got lots of time. One week? My wife and two of my youngest friends here, Joe was working also, two of the young boys playing Joel and me and my parents. Well, that was, we do that, we generally get together at Christmas and at that time of year, but Davey's been overseas for 13 years. He has made trips back around that time. John lives in Auckland, so he wouldn't normally
No, I'll just get it to play separately.
Alright, so why don't you go walk with
Can I just invite you to take your seats for our next session? Thank you. It gives me great pleasure in introducing our next speaker, of whom many of you will know. Hamish has a wonderful history in the Presbyterian Church, has a wonderful history in Presbyterian schools, this one for 21 years. He is the moderator designate of the Presbyterian Church at Aotearoa, New Zealand, which position he's about to take up. I personally have known Hamish for many years, firstly in my time at St Andrews as a prep school teacher, then as a mentor as my time in church ministry, and I was hoping to learn lots and lots from him as a chaplain of a school, this one particularly, and so I applied to become his assistant, of which he said he'd give me 2 or 3 years, and he took off after a year. But that was all good because he continued to play a role in me becoming ordained within this school as a chaplain, and has continued to encourage me and be a great friend. And so it's wonderful to have you, Hamish, come and speak to us about empowering generations, and he has a lot to say and stands in a good place to tell us about that. So welcome, Hamish.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely to be here with you. Actually, Paul didn't tell the full story because he came to work with me, and then he was worshipping at Hornby Presbyterian Church, which became a Hope, and told the senior minister there, Murray Talbot, who was looking to retire, well, Hamish is looking for something in the next wee while, so he kind of facilitated this. I was in Taranaki just recently. My son and daughter-in-law and beautiful granddaughter Bella live up there, and we were in New Plymouth, Bella and I, and there's an art gallery there. It's quite big, and it takes art from anyone who wants to display it from the region, so there's a whole variety of pieces there. And I saw this piece of art that really struck me, and I'm still thinking about it. So my question today is, why bother with RE? And I reckon this piece of art says a lot about that. There it goes. Okay. I was pretty tempted to buy it. It was only $215. But my wife answered, I don't know where you put that, Hamish. I thought we could put it in Cashmere Presbyterian Church where I am now. So look at that piece of art. It struck me. I'm still thinking about it. What do you see in there? What do you get out of that? What's the message?
emotional response to start with.
What is that, Gillian?
I hate it.
Do you? Okay.
It's like a dying empire.
Dying empire, that's interesting. Because of the skull. Yeah.
Death of America.
Death of America. What else do you see there?
What's at the bottom?
Oh, at the bottom, that's interesting because you can't really see that. But you know how they used to have the wagons, the old pioneers? And they circle the wagons. Well, it's a wagon. It's a pioneer wagon that's underneath there.
Reminds me of a Manifest Destiny painting.
Okay, tell me about that. A Manifest Destiny painting.
Yeah, well, probably just called Manifest Destiny. And it's of a woman, kind of an angel type figure, holding up some kind of torch, leading the American settlers westward. Probably building on that comment about giant empire.
What do you get with the... What do you see here?
Christianity's lost its way.
Why? Why, Paul?
Because it's got money underneath it, so it's become more associated with capitalism and America.
Yeah, nationalism trumps the crucifix, and money's tied in there somewhere, and I'm going to defend that with a gun. Do you see the gun? Yeah. And I just thought, well, it really makes me think. But one of the things that it made me think was the complex mixture of politics and economics and religion in our world today, and the fact that that's often been the case as we look through history, and that you can't really understand the way the world is unless you understand these things, and therefore understanding religion becomes a really important part of understanding the world in which we live today. Therefore, in terms of education, it becomes really important. As I was preparing for this, reacquainted myself with a book that I read some years ago when I was teaching here at St Andrews by Houston Smith, who was probably regarded last century as the greatest authority in terms of religious studies coming out of the States. Great book, Why Religion Matters. It's worth having a good read. He says, the crisis the world finds itself in is located in something deeper than particular ways of organising political systems. That's the flag that was on top of the crucifix. And economies, the dollar sign that was hanging off the crucifix. Its cause is in the spiritual condition of the modern world. That condition is characterised by loss, the loss of religious certainties and the transcendence with larger horizons. I've got a quote later, which is interesting too, where he says that the earliest artefacts that we've discovered, archaeologists have discovered, are not economic or political, but religious. And you know, the earliest song that we've discovered, and it's out of, I think, Syria, and there was some profile on that last year on Radio New Zealand. The earliest song is a religious song. And so this religious thing, this spiritual journey is deeply embedded in the human condition. Now, the UK, I think, does this well with their religious education. So in the UK, there's a system of teaching religious education right through their education program, their curriculum. And I like this. Religious education, academically rigorous and personally inspiring. And there's a quote that goes with their curriculum that says, religious education that provides our young people with tools to interpret religious issues and evaluate their significance. I like that. I like those two things. To interpret and to evaluate. So I think that piece of art that I saw was someone, an artist, seeking to interpret what was happening in American society. And I think the last 5 years or so, with Trump's presidency and the rise, I think, of what has been not just white supremacy, but white Christian supremacy in the States, has raised all kinds of questions about how do we interpret that? What do we make of that? And then now we've got this guy here as the President of the United States, and probably the most about, outwardly and inwardly committed Christian since Jimmy Carter. And so how do we interpret him and the difference between a man called Trump, who stands, clears the crowd with tear gas and stands outside a church opposite the White House with the Bible? Some say it was upside down, I don't know. Versus this man who's also saying he's Christian, but has got a whole different set of values. And so those two things that are being talked about there, to interpret, but also to evaluate becomes a really important thing if our young people are to understand the world today, what's happening in the world, and to work it all out. I reckon there's a tragedy and an opportunity in New Zealand society today. I think the tragedy is that the secular education system pretty much ignores the religious dimension. There's very little that is taught or evaluated or interpreted in the secular education system in New Zealand, compared with, say, the UK. But then the opportunity is for schools like the church schools, the opportunity for schools like the schools that you are part of, to do that well and to prepare our young people for a world where religion is so important and you can't understand the world unless you understand it. So I reckon there's a tragedy and an opportunity, and you've got the opportunity. This, for me, was really highlighted after the mosque attack. One of the quotes out of the ARI system in the UK was this: ARI has the power to challenge the stereotypes, promote cohesion and tackle extremism. And Peter Nelson, Peter here, who's new on the board at St Andrews College, we were in Kashmir Presbyterian together, and we were talking about this. Peter made a comment to me that I think is so true, that it took the mosque attacks here in Christchurch for us Christchurch people to deepen our understanding of Islam. And I'm sure that's been the case. I've been really fortunate because my wife Anne, in her previous job, worked with a Muslim woman named Harry, and they befriended us, and they live in our area, and it's been a lovely relationship. So they're very hospitable. They love to have you for meals, so we've been for lots of meals there. The problem for me is that they like to sit on the ground, and I'm not very good at that. So it's kind of uncomfortable in one way, but it's beautifully comfortable in another way because of the hospitality that they extend to us. And then Anne, my wife Anne, serves on a community board with the Imam of the mosque, Jamal, and then he moved into our street. And so we had a lovely thing during Ramadan, how they eat after dark. And so a couple of times they just asked us to come and join them to eat. And it was quite a house full because of people from the mosque. And here's the thing, because I taught religious education and had a little bit of understanding about Islam, I was able to engage in conversations and ask questions. And, they love to have that conversation. And they want to know what you think. And one night we were sitting there, we had a beautiful feast, and I was sitting there talking to this Muslim gentleman from Pakistan, and we were just sharing this stuff around what he thought and what he believed. I was able to say about the 5 pillars of Islam, and ask him about this, and it was just a wonderful conversation that was facilitated because I've had the privilege of doing religious education here at St Andrews, teaching it, and had enough information, A, to break down the stereotypes, but B, to engage in the conversation. And I think if we can prepare our young people to have those conversations, then it really does break down that stuff. And I think they're interested. When I was here at St Andrews one year, I arranged for the Imam of the mosque at that time to come in and speak at a Year 13 speaker period. So Year 30, you still do that, Christine? Yeah. So it was just after 9/11, and so it was quite topical. And he came in, they were very interested, and they asked him about the conspiracy theory that it was actually this, is it the CIA, the FBI or the CIA that organised the planes? And he said, I'm open to that possibility, which you can imagine that we really interestingly. But it was, they were talking. And yet here's the thing, that when I went to ask him if he would come and speak, it was the first time I'd ever been to the mosque, and I was nervous, and I kind of wasn't sure where to go, and I eventually found him. And I know that he was nervous about coming here and speaking to me, but I think in Christchurch today, in terms of the relationship between the churches and the mosques, that's broken down, and that's a wonderful thing. And the wonderful thing also is that at the end of the year, the students voted on the speaker periods, which ones they liked the best, and that was number one. So I thought that was really cool. Just a couple of things here in terms of the big picture understanding of the importance of religion in the world today. And so the first one is the influence of religion in the world. I'll specifically look at Christianity, but could say this, there's a whole heap of different religions that impact really deeply on the way the world is today. But in terms of Christianity, think about the ways in which the Bible has influenced the world today. So names like Andrew, Joshua, David, Sarah, Peter, Elizabeth, Esther, names that have come out of the Bible. Our calendars have been shaped, our seasons and our holidays. You think of music, Bach and Mozart and Handel, but also in more contemporary times, U2, Mumford and Sons, and even the Spice Girls, two become one, have songs that have been influenced by or taken text or ideas from Christianity. In Shakespeare, there are 1,300 quotes or allusions from the Bible. This great writer, how can you understand Shakespeare if you have ignorance about the Bible? And I think about that and I think, wow, this is a pretty influential book as part of a system of religions in the world that has impacted on the world. I've got a little video clip, it's just a couple of minutes, it's interesting and it just gives a wee insight into this. Video clip.
Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labour in vain.
I love reading and I love books. Sometimes I read on my Kindle, but I still love to have a hard copy in my hands too. Here are a few global bestsellers that you may be familiar with. Perhaps you've read these.
The best-selling book of the last 5 years. The Bible. Yeah.
The best-selling book? Well, it won't be the Bible anymore, I can tell you that.
So many books on the bestseller list. I can't tell.
Well, I don't know, deliciously Ella.
Something like Lord of the Rings? Hobbit?
I'd say it's definitely Gone Girl, personally. I think, yeah. I think any book that's been made into a film, but I think Gone Girl's had the biggest. I mean, you've got the Oscars and everything as well with the award there, but yeah, definitely Gone Girl.
50 Shades of Grey?
I would guess it's probably like Harry Potter or something like that.
50 Shades of Grey.
But it may surprise you to realise that the Bible is still the world's best-selling book every single time.
Really? No, okay, yeah, that surprises me. That surprises me. I don't know. I think people kind of stick their nose up at religion.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Still the Bible.
Is it really?
No. Really?
No.
Wow.
No. I wouldn't have thought it's the sort of thing that people would go out and buy and still read, really, I guess.
Last year, more copies of the Bible were bought and sold than all these others put together.
about a favourite period of Christian history for me, which was in the 19th century, and the likes of William Wilberforce and the evangelicals, who just made a huge impact, including our treaty, the impact that they had on the Treaty of Waitangi. But you know, the abolition of slavery, even the SPCA, can trace itself back to them. And the book that's been written that Paul put me onto just recently by Tom Holland, called Dominion. Have you come across this book? So he's a well-known secular historian and atheist, but he's looked at the impact of Christianity on the world today, and he says, even though many people don't see it, like those people who are asked about, which is the best-selling book, they don't see it. Even though they don't see it, there's just been a huge transformation that took place with the Christian faith that is still having a huge impact today. And here's a quote from him. Holland makes an extraordinary, well-documented case that the central values and priorities of modern Western secular culture have actually come from Christianity. And even now, when most of the educated classes have abandoned Christianity and when religion is in sharp decline amongst the populace, Christianity has such an enduring, pervasive influence that we cannot condemn the church for its failure without invoking Christian teaching and beliefs to do so. Well, that's Tim Keller talking about the book. But just talking about the impact, and therefore understanding the world today, we need to understand religion. But I also think it's an existential question, and that we have a responsibility of not just putting these facts out there for our young people so that they can understand the world better. It's about them understanding their place in the world. And I think, you know, in terms of philosophy and well-being and spirituality, we have a responsibility to our young people to allow them to work with the questions, the big questions of life about, you know, where have I come from? Why am I here? How then do I live? Where am I going? Our young people need to work with those questions. They're just so important. I remember at a conference like this listening to Michael Carr-Gregg as part of the church schools movement, and Michael Carr-Gregg, a psychologist from Australia, who was saying that our young people, in order to be well, need to have connectedness, and they need to be connected and feel belonging to their family, their school, and to meaning. And if you take that away from them, then they're lost, they're disconnected. And so the teaching of religious education, why bother with religious education? Part of that is actually allowing young people to grapple with these ideas. Smith says, the guy from Why Religion Matters, there is within us, and even the blithest, most light-hearted of us, a fundamental disease. It acts as an unquestionable fire that renders the vast majority of us incapable of, in this life, of ever coming to full peace. This desire lies in the marrow of our bones and in the deep regions of our souls. I believe that, and I believe we need to allow our young people to grapple with that. And Smith puts up as an example of this grappling, this Gauguin painting. Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going? I hadn't really looked at that painting in depth before, but it actually does grapple with those ideas. And so he gives that as an example of something that is universally grappled with. So what are our origin? What's our purpose? What's our destiny? That's so important for us to allow our young people to deal with those questions. Smith again. Smith says, the modern world seems set on preventing us from getting in touch with this longing, with its unending phantasmagoria. What's that word mean? Anyone know? I do. You don't know? Jordan? Wow. Yeah, it's a dreamlike state where things are kind of out of kilter. Dreamlike state, so. phantasmagoria of entertainments, obsessions, addictions, and distractions of every sort. But the longing is there. I like this quote. The longing is there, built in us like a jack-in-the-box that presses for release. The longing is there, built in us like a jack-in-the-box that presses for release. And so then the question becomes, okay, if that question is there like a jack-in-the-box that keeps religious education in our schools, what are the barriers? Because, the state system in New Zealand doesn't want to do it. And there's a reason for that. What do you think are the barriers, say, in the state sector, the barriers that prevent this teaching of religious education? I mean, obviously in the UK they've overcome those barriers or just decided that they're not sufficient. But what are they? What stops it?
A vocal minority.
Vocal minority could be there.
Generations of people being told that it's not worth thinking about at school.
Yeah.
Why would it come in?
Sidelined, irrelevant. Yeah. But of course it is incredibly relevant. Yeah. But what else? Government policy. Tell me more about that.
Oh, that it was set up that
Yeah.
it doesn't get...
Separation of state and church. Yeah. Any other ideas?
It's fantasy.
It's fantasy. Yeah, it could be there, just. Yeah.
Lack of good teachers.
Lack of good teachers could be there. You know what I reckon? I reckon that it's fear. And it's fear, and I think the church has got a responsibility for it. It's a fear that the young people are going to be manipulated and bullied into faith. It's a fear that the people teaching this will use it as an opportunity to evangelise and force religion down people's throats. I think that's it. Personally, that's the problem. But you've got to say that's also a problem in our church schools. It could be. But we have to deal with that problem. And I've got a theory about this. At one of the church schools conference years ago, we explored the three different ways in which you can teach religious education. And I found that hugely helpful. I talked about it with the chaplains and RE teachers on Monday. So the first way is a catechismal approach, which is pretty much saying we want to make you into little Christians. And I had an experience here some years ago because I used to do this thing in Year 12 where we talk about, this is the Christian faith. And if you would like to engage with that a bit deeper and think about baptism or confirmation, then we'll have conversations about that. But it's an invitation if you'd like to. And every year a few would want to do that. And then a farmer who had a son in the boarding house rang me and said, I want my son confirmed. I said, we have this program and your son didn't choose to go any further with it. What? He said, when I dip my sheep, do you think I give them a choice? But that's the catechismal approach. It's forceful, it assumes faith, it's a manipulative, I believe. Yeah. And I don't think we want to be in that game. And then there's the neutral approach, which is the UK. And I've got a problem with that too, because I think when you're talking about understanding of life and the big life questions, you need to be able to provide some kind of opportunity for young people to make some personal responses to that. And so I prefer the third, which I would call invitational. And that third invitational way is to say, hey, look at this religious sector of our society and what it means to be human. And we're coming at it from a Christian perspective because we're church schools, but we also want to talk to you about what other religions think as well. We want you to consider that and to evaluate that. And we love it also, if you're wanting to make some kind of personal response, to work through that. And if we can help you with that, we'd be really pleased to do so. It's an invitational approach. And I personally think that's the way we should be teaching religious education in our church schools. And the beautiful thing is that we have a real invitation to do that because of the way that these church schools have been founded. This is a beautiful chapel. I'm just in awe of it. I'm also very fond of the old chapel because I worked there for 21 years. I was very fond of that as well. And I know the process that took place around what was going to be rebuilt after the old chapel was compromised by the earthquake. And I remember at one stage Christina was talking about whether it was going to be a dual purpose and pipe band chapel. Remember that? Yeah. And to your credit, you've built this amazing chapel and you've invested in it, and it just stands here proudly as a symbol of the way this school really does value and takes seriously the origins of the school and the values and the faith, but also, I think even more importantly, how crucial this piece is in the education of our young people. And just as this building stands here proudly, I think we need to also stand here proudly with the way we deliver our religious education. Not that it be something we're embarrassed about or sidelined, but something that's central, and we say, actually, there's a tragedy in this country that most of our schools aren't even addressing this, and we're proud to have taken the opportunity that our heritage has allowed us. That's it.
I just want to say thank you very much. As usual, you have inspired me, made me think beyond myself, but I'm always reminded what a wonderful speaker you are. You engaged us first and then provided us with questions we could think about. But I'm with Anne, that art belongs where it stays.
I'm still thinking good.
Thank you all. I was really worried yesterday because the catering staff were saying, are you going to be on time for your meal? And look, lo and behold, 1 o'clock lunch in the dining room. If you just saunter over there, they will be ready for you. Thank you for previous 4 speakers on the power of the word. It was perhaps a bit of a weird theme, but they have run with it, which is fabulous. Back here, sorry, lunch is a little bit short, partly because you had a very long morning tea. So if you can be back here by 1:45 for the truly exciting extravaganza of an AGM, which possibly will finish in an inordinately quick time, and you can have a little break before Jordan Redding is ready to speak. And then after Jordan speaks, we will go into the breakout groups, and you're going to get split into 3. Now, I know some of you are not labelled principals, board members, or chaplains, so you can go where you feel you fit. We don't want to label you too severely. But the chaplains will be going out here to the RE classroom. Follow Paul and Ben. They know where they're going, I assume. Yeah. And the principals group's going into this wee room here, as long as the door opens. And board members and anybody else are going to stay here. And then you've got free time, and then it's drinks back in Stroman House at 6 o'clock. Right?
And don't forget the tour.
Oh, the tour, yes. Come back if you need to pick up your bag, find out where your bags have gone to, and come back here if you want to go for the tour with Gillian. Right, I think that's it. Lunch. The bags will be safe here, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, I'm going to leave stuff. he got Reverend turned over. Did you not get Reverend? Oh yes, you did, yes. Yes, I know, I'm sorry. Well, if you won't mind that now. Not quite, that's right, yeah, you're working like this. Exactly. So I haven't been called the right reverend before, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. No, I'm not. I'm not. You can only be a right reverend once you've been a moderator. Oh, you're a bishop. I think you're a bishop, a right reverend. Yeah. Well, once you are a moderator, you become. So when Hamish gets dubbed in September, he will become a right reverend from then on. Yes, that's right. He'll be there very reverend. Is it very reverend? Yeah. Yes. Oh, really? Okay, let's see. Very, very. Oh, I like it.
You'll need to take this off after today and charge it, because it doesn't look like it's charging over the USB. But you can see the lights are going down. It's got a long battery though, it lasts for 6 hours, so it's not going to die on us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can charge over optic cable.
Probably. You can't, you're right. You're right. But it's fine, it's got a 6 hour battery. It's still above 50%.
I mean, we barely worked out how to have negligible power loss so you can actually get a signal through. Charging is a lot more power.
Yeah, we met on Friday. But it's going, it's working.
And in fact, that's probably because there's a transmitter and receiver on that end, right?
Yep.
And this is a transmitter and receiver, and
Yep.
where do you think that's getting the power if there's no power transfer through the camera?
Yeah.
So the battery life of the camera is probably like, I don't know, 10% shorter or something.
Well, it's got a 6 hour battery, so we'll just unplug it and charge it and bring it back.
Should, because should we drop it off at your house or?
No, I can take it and charge it, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. I was just remembering to take it out the car.
Yeah. No. I'll remind you.
I think we can leave our multi-plugs in today, because there won't be people here after us.
Yeah, just take the cameras with the tripods.
It's one less thing we have to wire up tomorrow.
I was thinking that. I was worried about it being cold. I think it's got Oh, okay.
Just,
Well, it's really good heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mind you, it helps when you get insulation and stuff. You'd have to talk to one of the solutions people. It becomes isn't it? Yes.
And what school are you from?
The long word, Christian Church Schools Resource Office.
Based in London?
No. They said anywhere near the main airport. So since I'm here, I apply for the job instead. Because otherwise, that's why one of the reasons Sharon, the previous person, resigned. She was moved from Wellington to Hamilton. She just found it really hard. Yes, that's wonderful. No, I think it's a brilliant idea to at least, because it's something beautiful, isn't it? But, you've kind of got current time group. Yeah. It lets us start the ball rolling, because I mean, I'm trying to have some of those conversations, but I have to say,